Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Hey everyone, B1B Flyer here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a simple red earth or clay base while also introducing the basics of how to use pigment powder to accent the colors on your base work, as well as weathering the lower areas of a mech to make it look like it's been walking through dirt and grit. For this tutorial, I'll be using Mid Brown from Army Painter's Quick Shade line. You could also use Agrax Earth Shade if you don't have that. For the base paint color, I'm using Beastie Brown, but any reddish brown that you like is perfectly fine. And then I've got Secret Weapons Dark Yellow Pigment Powder. For materials, I've got a basic application brush. I've got a stiff number 1 older brush that I'll use, some tweezers, some static grass, and some super glue to help apply it. If you haven't already watched the how to make your own basing paste video that I have, it'll be linked at the end of this video. It's the same material I use to establish the texture on the bottom of the base before we begin. If you don't want to do this, you could also use any of the commercially available products like paste from Vallejo, Secret Weapon, MIG, any of those. They have different materials that you can use to create a base texture. You could use sand, but it's going to end up looking much more like rocky surfaces versus a smooth out clay or earth type of material. You can see here I've already applied the basing texture to my base and let it dry. Now I'm going to base coat the entire area with the Beastie Brown. Any reddish brown or whatever earth color that you want to use, it will be just fine. Let that dry completely, and now it'll be time to add the wash. I'm going to be using the Mid Brown, but again, if you want, you could use Agrax Earth Shade instead. I do just have a wash application brush here. Anything that you want to use, it's fine. You don't need a whole lot. Really all you're looking for as you apply it is to get enough on the surface to have certain areas have a little bit of pooling. As that dries, it's going to create a little bit of shading and recessed shadow that will make it appear much more realistic at a distance than it would without these contrasting areas. It will probably try to pool up around the feet of the miniature, so once you're done applying it all the way around the areas, you're going to want to go back and look and maybe wick away a little bit of that, because otherwise it can really pool up pretty heavily if you're not paying attention. You don't mind a little bit, but just be aware of that. Now that the wash is dry, I've got a stiff old cheap brush that I'm going to use. I'm going to take my Secret Weapon Dark Yellow Pigment Powder and I'm going to start to apply it. They do have lighter colors. You can go with any other manufacturer's pigment powders, and this will be the most basic application of pigment powder you can do. We're not putting any additives or fixers, alcohol, or anything like that. It is going to put out a weak result overall as far as the pigment strength is concerned, but this is the basics that you can move off of once you start to get familiar with how pigment powders work. I'm just taking a little bit at a time and pushing it into all the crevices and cracks. I really just want to load it up more than you think you need. Now ordinarily I would do this over a picnic plate or something disposable to make it easy to clean up and not get this powder all over my desk area, but that won't really video very well. You can see me from time to time stippling and pushing the pigment around a little bit. Some of it can be a little bit clumpy, which is why I'm using that stiffer brush. It helps break that large chunks of the pigment down to a little bit smaller and much more useful for this scale of miniatures. You do want to be very careful not to touch your miniature while you're doing this. You can see I've already got it on my hands, so if you finished your paint job, this is a easy way to mess up your paintwork if you're not careful. So just keep that in mind, that you want to have something to hold on to prevent you from spraying pigment all over everything. You can see I just tap a little bit to get rid of some of the excess, and all of this will be done in lieu of a dry brush. So if you're not a fan of dry brushing on bases or on the feet or whatever to make it look like there's some dust and dirt and grime buildup, then maybe this technique is more your style. You can certainly dry brush and do this technique as well, so you can find a balance of what you like. I'm just showing this to isolate it and let you see what you can achieve. Now you can see I've got it pretty heavy on the base, and now I'm working on to the feet and the lower legs to give that kicked up dust and dirt type of appearance. Now don't worry, it's going to mute out a little bit because we're doing a dry application. A lot of it is going to be essentially lost after it's sprayed. And you will need to spray this because a fixer for pigment powder holds the pigment together and prevents it from ever moving again. If you're not using that, what we're going to use is the enamel clear coat that I would use to clear coat the miniature with. So just keep that in mind, that this is something you want to do towards the end of the process. Since I'm going to be finishing up the miniature, I like to put a black rim around my bases. I like to use Vallejo's Surface Primer. It gets a nice strong coat over pretty much anything in 2 coats or less usually. and it's got a little bit of flex in it because it's a polyurethane primer. So if it's, you know, bumped or scraped or whatever, it's less likely to chip necessarily. It's not, you know, impenetrable, but I just like the results, and it's easy to work with, and I have it lying around. You can certainly use black paint or whatever else you want to edge your bases with. Now that that's dry, I'm going to move on to the static grass, or you could do these clumps here. You could do any clump foliage, whatever it is you want to put on your base, or nothing at all, that's fine. So I've got tweezers and I've got some super glue to help it adhere, and I'm just going to press these down and get them into areas where I think it'll look interesting, and it helps break up a little bit of that monotone dirt area just to make it look a little bit more realistic, like there's vegetation maybe on this planet. The other nice thing is you can use these colors to offset whatever colors the miniature you painted in. Since I did a gray camouflage, it's fairly neutral, not a whole lot to stand out. I'm just giving a little pop of color here and there to make things look more appealing overall. One trick you can do is you can take some scissors or your hobby knife, and you can take these round clumps and you can cut them in half, you can cut them in quarters, whatever shape you need. The nice thing is once you've got that flat edge, now you can use a little more surface area on that in the hex base where the feet are, and you can bring that static grass hard edge right up to that foot so it looks like it's standing on the actual brush or vegetation, instead of having everything kind of just be in between the legs or behind. It's just a little trick I like to use to make things look a little bit more natural. Once you're done with that, it's time to seal up your miniature. So I recommend you use your clear coat. Make sure everything is all completely dry. I like a matte sealer myself. And here you can see the results of how everything turns out and completely merges together. You don't get those harsh contrast colors over the dirt, but you do get a nice variation from where we use the wash and the pigment powder. And if you look closely here, you can see the weathering inside the feet and all those other areas where we put the pigment powder. Tex, over to you.
We certainly hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and leave your questions or comments below. Follow us on Facebook at Battletech Camo Specs Online. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Heat critical, shutdown imminent. Time for Pop-Tarts.